Hey, Benny! How you doing?
Good, and you?
Good. Okay, bro, listen. Have you heard of this guy, Emmanuel Macron?
Yes, I love that guy.
Me too! Okay. What? On October 16th, 2020, a French schoolteacher, Samuel Paty, was beheaded by a follower of Islam who was enraged by the display of blasphemous cartoons in class. On October 20th, a Paris mosque was closed down by the government to clamp down on radical Islam. A couple days later, on October 22nd, French President Emmanuel Macron paid tribute to Paty, calling him a quiet hero. He proclaimed that he had been slain by cowards for channeling the secular values of France. He was killed because Islamists want our future, Macron said. On October 24th, the Turkish president, Erdogan, stated that Macron needed mental health treatment, and France recalled its ambassador from Turkey. From October 24th, calls to boycott French goods alongside widespread protests were ignited and grew across Muslim-majority countries in Asia and the Middle East. Now, this image here is from one of the protests ignited by the events taken on the 26th of October 2020 from protests in Peshawar, Pakistan. And these Muslim men from Pakistan, a continent away from France, placed the title of terrorist next to an image of Macron himself, turning the narrative on its head. The men in this photograph hence pose the hypothesis around which this paper will pivot. Is Emmanuel Macron a terrorist, as these protesters claim? Who is the real terrorist here? The Oxford Dictionary defines terrorism in 4 parts. It is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against citizens, in the pursuit of political aims. In the past year, France has seen a tumultuous period in its relationship with those who follow the religion of Islam, and the bandying of this word from all sides in these conflicts has been seen. Going back to our first image, let's start off with an analysis. We see a cohort of Pakistani men dressed in traditional attire, many donning caps, gathered behind a massive sign that is inscribed in English. It is important to notice that the men appear well dressed and have pens in their front pockets. The place behind them appears to be some sort of marketplace with shops obscured but discernible in the background. Both their varied dressing, as not all of them are dressed in black or are wearing Muslim caps, and their variability in facial hair points that they're probably not members of what Macron would refer to as an Islamist organization. These are, in fact, ordinary tradespeople from Peshawar. Moving on to the poster, there are 2 components to this protest poster: the image on the left and text on the right. The photograph of Macron seems to be a professional-looking portrait that has been doctored with an overlay of a black shoe print, evoking the sense of someone stepping on his face. The text is a combination of livid red and black, with 2 different font sizes, all caps, evoking a sense of fury. The word terrorist is plastered on top as a single statement matching the color of the footsteps, with the words "the world's biggest terrorist" are visible below. Immediately, one questions the use of the English language, as it is not one that is widely spoken in Pakistan as compared to the main colloquial language Urdu. The grammar employed in the poster is also incorrect, which points to the seldomness of usage of the language in a local setting. Hence, one can draw the conclusion that this poster was meant to be seen by an international audience. It is not written in French either, which makes us conclude that this statement is one that was made in solidarity with and to reach out to countries except for the local and the one it is against, which is France. This fits in with the international nature and sense of community in the movement inspired by Macron's comments, as similar protests were held in countries such as Bangladesh, Turkey, and Iran. One may safely assume that these tradespeople in the photograph were aware of and wanted to be part of this movement that extends beyond their locality. Focusing on the doctored image of Macron, the aggressive undershoe pattern evokes that of boots or heavy-duty footwear, creating an image of both aggression and understanding of the frustration that the creator of this image must have felt. A shoe print is not what one immediately thinks of when they think of the word terrorism, but there is an authority that comes with footwear and evocation of the military. There is an important element in cultures across Muslim countries of footwear and impurity. When one enters your house, you must remove your footwear because shoe soles are considered to be dirty. There are also infamous moments in history, such as when a shoe was thrown at President George Bush in the aftermath of 9/11 and the War on Terror, as well as the throwing of a shoe at corrupt Pakistani ex-president Asif Ali Zardari, where the shoe is seen as a symbol of both dissent against politicians and intentional disrespect to these figures in protest imagery. To summarize, the claim of this image is that Macron is a terrorist, and this claim is being made by Muslim tradespeople from Peshawar, Pakistan, and they are aware of the events that have transpired across the world. The image provides little context as to why this claim is being made, but it conveys the belief that the protesters have in this claim. Now, we consider the usage of this image in media. First, we have this image being disseminated by Pakistani media, an online journal named Pro-Pakistani. Their aim, the outline that is outlined here, is to boycott French goods in order to extract an official apology from the French government. The article says, Sherjil Mir, president of the Central Association of Punjab Traders, said that the French government and citizens have always hated Islam. They said that President Macron's hateful comments towards Islam and his support for insulting activities against Prophet Muhammad have hurt Muslim sentiments across the world. Using this extra context given by the article that is derived from the interviews with the people in the image itself, their take on our main question is explained as being that Macron is a terrorist because he has used the tactic of intimidation, fulfilling 1 out of 4 criteria of terrorism against Muslims who are his own citizens, fulfilling 2 out of 4 criteria of terrorism. This brings up the question of whether these tradespeople feel as though they are also victims of this terrorism or if they only speak out on behalf of French Muslims. Now we move on to see how this holds up with the take of Muslims from other parts of the world. Here we see the same visual imagery as that from Pakistan and a very similar caption being used by different people. The protesters are from an Islamic political party from Bangladesh. What's different here is that Macron's name is added and the sentence is simple and coherent. It lacks the frantic nature of the image from Pakistan and the protesters appear more serene. There's also a visual resonance of the caps and white clothing of a similar style adorned by protesters across the previous image. The visual unity expressed through caps and clothing kind of points towards the narrative of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is key in these protests, and the imagery that is also shared by the protesters to express their dissent. This answers one of our sub-questions that the intimidation in question is felt by followers of Islam in different countries around the world, and people in these foreign countries simultaneously feel an identity that echoes across their different geographical locations. Again, to refer back to the hypothesis posed by the key image, Macron fulfills 2 out of 4 criteria of terrorism. There is no change here: intimidation and against civilians. Next, this image is interesting because the poster uses the same tagline as the previous ones, but a different imagery. The foot is fascinatingly still present when you look at the image closely, as that of a real person directed towards the caricature of Macron, which adds a different layer of meaning to the image. This poster provides the most context and clarity out of all the ones that we have seen. It clarifies that Macron is a real terrorist, along with a print that states that France is also a real state terrorist, and points to that there have been allegations of the other side's people and states being advocates of terrorism through the word real. It also has the words boycott printed across the image of Macron that points to boycotting of French goods that the protesters ask for. The caricature and use of taglines together are valuable because it shows a symbolic upending or reversal of the narrative. There are also additional posters in the background, such as the ones that say, I love Muhammad, and these kind of give the viewer further context into what the intimidation that the state of France and Macron is being accused of are. Moreover, this poster also has a name in the top left corner of the group that organized it, Jamaah Ansarut Syria. The JAS is based in Indonesia, is a religious organization as listed as a terrorist organization on the Global Security Organization's website. The image then is a combination of ironies. An organization profiled by the West as a terrorist organization is accusing a Western nation and president of being a terrorist. Now, here we see the context in which this image was used. Memo: Middle Eastern Monitor is a non-for-profit press monitoring organization based in the UK. The article quotes the following. The Collective Against Islamophobia in France recorded in its latest report that there were 1,043 reported anti-Islam incidents in 2019, 77% increase on the figure for 2017. That number includes 68 physical attacks, 618 incidents of discrimination, 210 incidents of incitement to racial hatred, 22 incidences of vandalism of Muslim places of worship, and 32 incidences of discrimination related to combating terrorism. All these incidences were fueled by right-wing politicians and supporters, official institutions, the media, and intellectuals. This context adds the accusation of physical violence in addition to that intimidation against state citizens is being promoted by the French president. This context adds the accusation of physical violence in addition to that This context adds the accusation of physical violence in addition to that intimidation against state citizens is being promoted by the French president, directly bringing in the doing for political aim that is integral to our definition of terrorism. Memos also states that Macron couched his comments in a defense for freedom of expression, paying little heed to the necessity to protect people from physical and psychological harm. The French president's invocation of the state secularism opens the door to attack on minorities. The claim being made here is that Islamophobia breeds a lack of harmony and inciting of violence. Indirectly, the political handling of the matter by Macron is inciting further violence against his own citizens, both Muslim and non-Muslim. This image, with the context provided, seems to check all four boxes. French Muslim citizens are victims of intimidation, violence bred from Islamophobia, targets French Muslims, and the intimidation of these French Muslims breeds violence from their side onto non-Muslim citizens as a collateral of the disruption of social harmony. And this Islamophobia has been bred from the game of right-wing politics and political handling of the situation from Macron's government, evidenced by the exacerbation in Islamophobic incidences between 2017 and 2019. This hence makes the claim that Islamophobia, as it has been manifested in France, breeds terrorism, with all its conditions fulfilled. But the question of who the terrorist here is still undecided. Next, we address the French side of the media that use our image of hypotheses and grapple the accusation. This headlines that the Arab nations are angry, with an image from Pakistan accompanying this proclamation. Initially, the headline destabilizes the claim of the image by kind of getting across that the statement that the image is making is flimsy because it's being proclaimed out of immediate anger and irrationality. However, the headline is also comical because Pakistan is not an Arab nation. Pakistan is indeed a Muslim-majority country, but Arab nations are those where Arabic is the language of communication. Being Muslim and Arab can be mutually exclusive. This discrepancy between the visual material and its connotation is evidence of religious illiteracy. Religious illiteracy is the lack of understanding about both the basic tenets of religious traditions and the diversity of beliefs between religions in relation to their diverse social and historical contexts. Religious illiteracy is indeed one of the main causes of Islamophobia, which breeds terrorism. Harvard professor of Indo-Muslim languages and cultures, Ali Asani, explains, religious illiteracy is very dangerous for our society, our world. It leads to thinking about religious traditions as monoliths. By obscuring diversity and difference, it dehumanizes and stereotypes. It leads to prejudice and fear that endanger the whole project of democracy, since democracy cannot function if you're afraid of your neighbors who happen to be different from yourself. This hence helps us isolate the culprit of terrorism with a deeper probing into the problem. Islamophobia, as we have established, was the cause behind violence and intimidation to citizens, incited by elaborate politics inconsiderate of the human and social effect of these political games. This point is supported by the Muslims in other countries and the two other protest images who express hurt in the visual content of the images as a direct effect of the political moves being made around the handling of the situation in France. This image here tells us that religious illiteracy is at the root of Islamophobia, helping us resolve our question on who the real terrorist is. To conclude, the claim that anyone is a terrorist is a grand one, and the meaning of terrorism is more complex than the bandying around of the word in today's world would suggest. The identity of terrorism is not simple or exclusive to one person or one state. The identity of the terrorist in this debacle falls on the great systemic failure of Western society, which is religious illiteracy in marriage with Islamophobia. No one person and no one incident can incite and execute the far reaches of terrorism and the systems that terrorize on a scale that is embedded in the social fabric today. The terrorist is within the system, and this terrorism has been structured over a passage of time of embedding these systems into the lives of citizens. The culprits are not terrorists, but those that have allowed this terrorism to flourish and do not act in ways to dispel religious illiteracy to halt Islamophobia. Addressing the hypothesis that the traitors in our key image made, no, Emmanuel Macron is not single-handedly a terrorist, but his treatment of religious diversity in France has contributed to the machine of terrorism in an exacerbation of Islamophobia.